Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. In today's episode, unpacking a tweet from the tragically late Sinead O'Connor, deconstructing what cutting edge, that's in quotation marks, psychology tells us to do with triggers, and why it's the exact opposite of what Edenity would say is healthy, how life begins with chaos in every moment and why that matters, what we shouldn't learn from the new Barbie movie, and of course, much more. Thanks so much for listening. Greetings and welcome forward, everybody. Boy, do we have some interesting stuff to talk about today. And we're going to try to do it in a sober, heavy heart, sorrowful way. I don't know if we're going to be able to, honestly. I mean, that's quite a challenge. Maybe we'll do both. We'll make an and.
Well, we have to leave room for our human reactivity, sort of like you have to respect something, but you don't have to like it type of framework.
Yeah.
And so we can, as long as we don't overdo it, we can respond in our personal, this is why we don't like it, but
yeah, well, I'm all for, I don't have any problem with saying I don't like it. It's just I'm very self-conscious about disdainfully laughing at aspects of the world, and which is, it's very easy for me to do. So I try to be mindful of it and heartful of it. But some stuff is just so ridiculous. It's like, how do we not?
Well, if identity is what it purports or offers to be, then our frustration with the world is part of our humanness, as long as we don't over-attach to it and let it distort our heart, you know. So I think there's room for the whole gamut of it in identity. It wouldn't be in other spiritual paradigms, of course. But since we include the human and its spiritual nature of and to itself, including our not so bright sides or light sides. As long as we have meta about it, I think it's okay.
I think if I were to just own, and for our listeners, like you have no idea what we're talking about, but I'll give you a preview in one word: Kenergy. Kenergy being the energy of Ken from the recently released Barbie movie, and it being heralded as some kind of masculine or mental health ideal. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about today. And that's like, I could say I had derisive laughter come up when I read the article that we'll be talking about. But at the level of my soul, it's just sorrow. It's just, oh man, ouch. And sorriness and patience and compassion and pain about that. That's what's deeper. So I guess there's room for both, as long as I can get to the soul level as well with it.
There's laughing in absurdity and laughing in judgment. There's different tones to those. So I can't always be mindful. I'm not always mindful of the difference between those two, but I'm largely on the side of a heartful kind of, oh no, please don't tell me that's true, as opposed to what kind of idiots populate this planet, you know, and that's just not in keeping with an embodied hedonist, not because you can't do it. There's no rules, but an emotively mature person has a lot more nuance to their frustration indexes about the world.
Yeah, and here's a salient and current example. We're recording this on July 26th, and did you see in the news Sinead O'Connor is passed from this plane today?
I didn't see that, no.
Yeah, just in the last few hours it was reported. She was 56, I think. And so I was curious about the cause of death because it was auspiciously or suspiciously excluded. And she's been diagnosed bipolar and has a previous suicide attempt on her record, so to speak. And part of the thing that's been coming up in the news is that her 17-year-old son committed suicide in 2022. And here's a direct quote from what she wrote right around the death of her son. "Been living as an undead night creature since. He was the love of my life, the lamp of my soul. We were one soul in two halves." This is about her son. "He was the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. I am lost in the bardo without him. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So here's a great example of a dual reaction. It brings tears to my eyes because I don't know her music or her art very well, but what I do know I really like, and I can feel her soulfulness, and she's a powerful woman. Spoke out against the Pope and the Catholic child abuse. Really a force for good in the world.
yes.
Her mother sexually abused her. This is also a known thing. And so on one hand, it's completely understandable that she would also invade her own child such that, and matize with him thinking he's the love of my life. We're supposed to see this and, well, it's dual. Like most people see this and go, oh, how tragic, a mother lost her son. But what she also lost was a false mate, and she seriously abused this kid if this is how she held it. And I mean, I almost can't even let the words come out of my mouth, but that's part of why he killed himself.
Yes.
And it's awful just to feel no one's to blame, and this is all terrible, and what a mess.
Absolutely. And the framework, of course, Joseph is talking about here is in Edenity, which is not the normal way of looking at things from psychology or parenting, it is abusive to the max for a parent to mate with a child energetically. And when it's dressed up in that kind of verbiage, it makes it look like it's a noble thing. They might have been soulmates, but
in a past life,
right? In a past life, that's fine. But emotively mature parents, unless Sinead, I mean, I've admired her since I knew her music. She really is an amazing being. Mm-hmm. But here's a case where amazing beings, when they don't do their own emotional body-based therapeutic healing, are going to repeat the very thing that their parents did to them. Yeah. And just because it's all dressed up in some sort of transcendent kind of soul love does not excuse it, the pathology of it. But like you just said, it's the sorrow here. You can't land anywhere, so you just got to sort of bounce around inside an enclosed globe of frustration, outrage, sorrow, empathy, all these things, and you can't land anywhere if you're really honest with your whole spectrum of human reactivity. Mm-hmm. So, wow, that is, I'm agape. That was framed by her as a positive thing. But what else could she do if she never recovered from her own childhood? So please, if listeners their ears kind of pricked up on this, please know that the reality of Edenity's frameworks does not mean that we withdraw love from that which we're appalled by. We're just appalled. We're just appalled. Our standard go-to quick definitions is that judgment what is
difference between observation and judgment.
Yeah, an observation can see something that, but you still don't withdraw love from it. But it only becomes a judgment if you withdraw love from that which you just observed or observed. So that's what we're trying to do here. But that's just astonishing to me.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think even a lot of mainstream therapists would say it's not healthy for a mother to be quelling about the unconditional love from her son.
Yeah.
To her son, most psychologists would not have a problem with, but from her son and this Bardo thing, I mean, man, wow.
Yeah, if she had been in Edenity's emotional body and soulmate care, we would have framed for her the possibility that his suicide was meant to reflect to her reactions to his suicide, would have told her how deeply she had not yet healed from her own invasion by the mother. And here she follows suit, which doubles and quadruples up in a loop. Both of them will have to dig themselves out of in future lives. He's more innocent in the sense because whenever this happens, it's always the parent's responsibility for it, not the child's. they just responded in this pathological way. And in a much milder case, of course, my own mother mated with me in exactly the same way, but never admitted it. And so it was all under the table and dark and nasty that way. So that's a real jaw dropper.
Yeah.
Wow.
And like I said, we don't know that Sinead O'Connor killed herself at this point, but everything seems to be pointing to it. And a year or so, I don't know if it's been a full year, but her son committed suicide in 2022 sometime. So it wouldn't be a surprise. And I think, my third eye says they probably were mates in a past life as well, which would have complicated the issue.
Which makes the whole thing even more tragic, because there's a beautiful truth. And in that sense, it's very hard for the parent who never healed their own starvation of heartful bandwidths that happen in childhood. They'll suck it right out of the child, because a lot of times mothers, especially mothers, because of their porosity of the yin, are going to mate with sons because it's a lot of times for mothers the first time love was ever educed out of them by a child. A child just brings that out, and many mothers never have had that kind of love experience, least of all with their husbands.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a real mess about that whole dynamical tragedy.
Yeah, the hook, it can't be avoided, and it's not supposed to be avoided. It's supposed to be processed through to some kind of healing resolution. But if there's no one who can help with that, and instead she gets a bipolar label and maybe meds probably to go with it, then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
That's our world. And on that note, we're going to be talking today exactly about some of the prescriptions. What was the first article that spurred this whole thing? The glimmer, yes.
The glimmer thing. So I didn't bring them up for our on my screen here.
I've got them on a screen. I can start by I can start at the top of and I found this article I think first, and I sent it to Stace, and we said we got to talk about this, and Stace found two others. So it's going to be continuing the happiness episode we did a few going deeper into that. So so the article goes, this is from, I was referring to Psych Central. I forget where it was really originally published. I'm just going to sort of skip around. So for many of us, especially those deeply entrenched in the worlds of mental health awareness and wellness, the idea of a trigger isn't unfamiliar. In case you were unsure, though, Psych Central, that's a website, says that triggers are, quote, sensory reminders that cause painful memories or symptoms to resurface. That might be an interesting place to pause and redefine that.
Oh God.
What is a trigger according to Edenity, and why is it not only a sensory reminder?
It's a gift of a red flag. A trigger is not meant to be seen as something negative, even though it feels negative. So it's reasonable and human to feel it as negative, but Edenity takes us one step behind that curtain and says this is a red flag that is a gift, because if you're triggered in ... way, then that relates to some unconscious fear pattern that you have, without which you wouldn't have had that particular trigger. So we look for the deeper causal wound that the present day trigger only brings up out of the unconscious to the conscious.
Yeah, so again, the definition they offer here is sensory reminders that cause, which is a suspicious use of the verb, cause painful memories, cause painful memories. So the cause of the painful memories and symptoms to resurface is the sensory reminder. That's where the cause is. Yes.
The cause is deeper. The trigger is the symptom showing up. And so you're right, that particular phraseology is a little mucky.
I would remind our listeners that excuse comes from the Latin ex causa, and that's an externalization of cause of the trigger. Right. So the cause of the trigger is not my childhood wounds and what I've done or not done with them so far. the cause is the sensory reminder. So the whole frame, we would say, for everything else that would follow this would be off. So then
Yes.
go
Let me,
on.
before you go on, I just want to bring a metaphor, and I think we'll utilize later here also in a different dimension, is that I often have used over the years the wonderful metaphor, which is shocking to a lot of people, sort of shocks them awake, is it's not the blade that causes us pain, it's our own nerves.
Oh, that's great.
See,
I
it's not
forgot
the
that
knife.
one.
It's not the knife that causes us pain. Yet all we do, been trained and conditioned to, malconditioned to do, is to see the trigger. In this case, if we carry through the metaphor, the trigger is the knife, but the cause is our own nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason that can be pretty clarifyingly shocking sometimes is that exactly in this way, it's not one to one, 100% resonant, but it's about 85 resonant, this metaphor, that the cause, the symptom is not the cause. And this is basically the existential blind spot in all psychology.
Yeah, well said.
Psychology.
Yeah, it's an upstream existential blind spot of everything. And I had an insight last night, at sort of toward the tail end of a blowout with my girlfriend, which I'll talk about at some point in this podcast, certainly by the end. But I had this insight of like, I just saw with a clarity I hadn't seen before that as children, our parents are both the solution and the problem. They're supposed to be the solution. And of course they are the solution. Otherwise we would never survive, a day past being born. So they're the solution. And then when they're not the solution, they're the problem. And then I saw in codependency, we make our mates either the solution or the problem.
Yes.
And they're neither.
Nice. Right.
They're neither. It's the solution is, oh, this person's supposed to make me happy and I'm going to be happily ever after as long as they behave according to exactly what I need. And when they don't, then they're the problem.
Right.
And that's the protector's frame projected from childhood. And then that's the whole needing love from rather than sharing love with and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly. That whole framework, that's what soulmateism or real, honest, sober intimacy is supposed to bring us. And we've just been malconditioned, squared, and cubed in this domain. And it warps all of our downline reactions to this, which then gives room for more and more distorted reactivities and judgments and confusions. And oh God.
Yeah, and it's of course easy to say. You've said to me very often about my relationship. She's the trigger, not the cause. She's the trigger, not the cause. She's the trigger, not the cause. It's very easy to say, but it takes many, many, many layers of work to actually be able to embody that even a little bit. So
absolutely, I can say in my version of that with Bree. It's taken me 7 years of constant vigilance and work to minimally, finally embody to some small degree that she's not the problem. My wounds and their reactivities is the problem, and that's my vertical job to heal. When we have protocols for that in EBE. And not Bree's problem to take care of for me. So, and it's the same for her reactions to me. It's that we always have to stay on our side, as we've talked many times about in these podcasts.
So I might as well bring this up now because it fits in the conversation. So last night, my lady and I were getting along quite well. I could tell she was starting to get hungry and she wasn't eating when I thought she should, but not my responsibility. But I know when she gets too hungry, things can get cranky very fast. And I suggested a couple of times, like, hey, maybe we should stop doing this thing. I think you probably need to eat. And she paid no heed to that. And we kept doing the thing we were doing. Then she started to get cranky. And it started small and subtle. And it got worse. And I have my frame, which has been for a while, probably been working at least a year on being able to let myself feel the hurt of it without explaining how she should be, without defending myself, without attacking her back, without any of those other things, and so I'd give myself, I'd say an A- on this. It was the best I'd ever done it. At one point I said, with only a little bit of aggression in my voice, just sort of sadly, like, this is exactly how my narcissistic mother treated me, when she demanded I say something, because I was just sitting there not knowing what to say that would be supportive of me feeling how hurt I was feeling. I did say in the beginning, like, she was like, well, why aren't you saying anything? I said, I'm just trying to feel how much this hurts. And it wasn't easy, because I could feel the walls coming up that were already up and wanting to get thicker. And I was just sitting there being like, don't argue, don't talk back, don't point out anything, just one thing, just feel the hurt. And and at one point she said quite nastily, well, you know, why are you putting up that wall like that? And it was completely reasonable in many ways for me to do that, because she was saying some really painful things. And then I thought, like, well, yeah, why indeed? Why do I have that wall up? It's like, I'm trying to show my protectors that this isn't my mother, and I'm not a child, and I can let all of this in and it won't kill me.
Yeah.
So I even though, of course, again, would be reasonable in lots of ways to have an energetic wall up. It wasn't saying anything, it wasn't doing anything, but I tried to open my heart even more to make it hurt even more. And after a minute or two, she just started sobbing. Something in her just broke. The whole thing probably took like 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and that took literally a year to be able to get to. And I think I probably could do it even better, but it was enough that she could feel her impact on me.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of, like, I had, you know, my main contribution to this, you know, conflict was that I chose a woman who would help me heal my childhood. Like, didn't do, if I did anything to help foment this, it would have been extremely subtle. And I own that. That was probably one of the hardest things I've done in my life.
I believe it, Joseph. Knowing you the way I know you, and loving you the way I know you, I love you, and respecting you the way I respect you. I get it. We're all flawed. What are we doing about it?
That's a bumper
that's
sticker.
all. That's the only arbiter here of this kind of thing. The throw stones thing that Yeshua, one of the few things in the Christian Bible, the Pauline Bible, that it was semi-accurate, is best not throw stones at anyone if you yourself haven't healed the very thing that you're condemning the other person for, or a resonant thing. So if we could all just do that, wow.
Yeah, and just to add in a little, to fill in some lines, the reason that took in part a year for me to be able to do is because the guy in me who was the explainer, the fighter backer, all of the other things that I've been doing, he needed to be differentiated and have his worldview heard, and have his feelings felt and all that, so that there was a minimally enough me present to be able to actually say. I mean, it was literally, I had a vision as I was going to sleep last night. It was like, it's like at any moment it's like relationality means at any moment your worst nightmare from childhood could happen, and you're supposed to go, oh, okay, so now this is happening. Great. You know, like, that's what's
without
required.
Transcending first shock.
Yeah, and actually be there and feel it.
Right. And that's exactly what these 3 articles don't do, which is, and that's why our reactivity to it is sorrowful, and meta migraines. I call them these meta migraines I get. They're instantaneous. And then they paralyze me for a moment, and then it moves through me, and I go, whoa, dude, how can you have done that? Or how could you have framed it that way? So it's meta migraines is my
Yes,
reactivity.
yeah. And just for the purposes of balance, I've said and done plenty of crazy and awful things to my lady as well, and so it's not like I'm any kind of victim here. It goes both ways. But I thought that would
Right.
be a good sort of counterpoint, because
Yeah.
that's
Right.
how we in Identity look at triggers, to
Right.
muster somehow enough soulfulness to see it as a gift, relate to it as a gift, and feel everything there is to feel. Because the in one way, the purpose of a trigger is to say, you could say, without the trigger, how the hell are you going to know what it felt like to be a child?
Yes.
You need that, and
Yes.
that's why they
Absolutely.
exist. There's a structural metaphysics for that, like that.
Yes.
It's a time travel capsule to go back to your childhood, and that's what I was doing. Being like, oh, like I knew my mother as a victimy, martyr, narcissist, but the feeling of it is
Mm.
way more like, oh, right, this feeling, this trapped feeling, this I've got to get away feeling, this I would do anything to destroy her if I only could, and make this stop. All of that came up, and it was like, wow, this was what it was like to be the son of my mother. And
Yes.
then I can be with that, and the protector doesn't have to be a layer over it, and
Oh,
disconnect me from my own soul, which is the net effect.
absolutely. There's another dimension that's worth mentioning here in your reveal here, Joseph, and that is the some of the biggest challenges that we map in the meta to what Joseph just said is how our protective self operates on will first,
Mm.
right? And so when we're trying to heal this kind of will-based, proactive or yogic or yinic kind of block wall or abuse, whatever it is, whichever form it is, uh, that we have to learn first from our deeper aspects of soul to begin with love first and put our will second from love, because the protector's will can't do that. There's
Mm-hmm.
no offset to it. When we say, when Joseph said he wanted, there was a, he completely honored the reactivity, and then himself, the deeper him, sat with it and tried to sink into
Mm-hmm.
a vulnerable, love based dynamic from which then to have his deeper, soulful, different reaction than the will based reaction, which is automatic for our protectors.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to adjudicate soul love first, then will, when all of our protection mechanisms, which is upwards of 2/3 of us, affect 2/3 of our total consciousness until healed, are all will first based. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what everyone's confused about, why it's so hard to change.
Yeah.
It's not neuromuscular accommodative conditioning. You just have these Pavlov dogian kinds of things in your body cells, which a lot of people believe. It's
Yeah.
just in the body, right? So to have an offset to that requires that we learn how to access a deeper version of I than just the protective I. And
Yeah.
that's what Joseph just beautifully spoke to, and how difficult that is. And how, when you get to a yin place about it, when you slow things down, as men, we tend to have yogic fast reactions, segmented reactions that way. When you finally slow it down, it's what it took Brie a long time to get and appreciate, is that I take longer to feel what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before it was rapid fire, instant, but
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't me. That was my protective self.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you slow it down, now I'm yin like, and sometimes that will be misinterpreted by Brie in a hot moment as that I'm walling off, when I'm actually searching for the deeper yin version of the thing that will unplug my old reactivity.
Yeah. I think that happened last night. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, because women tend to feel faster.
Yes.
But again, if we use feel, emotion, and at the base emotivity, women have faster access to more superficial feelings, but we're all
Yes.
slow to get to the deeper ones.
Yes, all of us equally.
Uh,
Equally, we segment our way to it. Yin women tend to, at least women on the healthy side of female yin bandwidths, uh, uh, will are wholer and less segmented than yang. So we can use our segmentation to go fast in an energetic version of a feeling, whereas women from their wholeness will feel a deeper feeling first
mhm.
than we would normally. Less energy, more real emotion. But then when we get down to the existential roots, we're all slow.
Yeah, and that's why something that is so I remind myself and the people I work with so often, there's just this barrier, I think, for all of us that we're conditioned to think we know what we feel.
Yeah.
It seems so
Right.
obvious. Of course I know what I feel. I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. It's like, yeah. That's the, the foam on the crest of the wave. But it takes a lot of work to even be able to access deeper emotions, especially in the heat of a moment where, there's protection mechanisms that very much don't want you to feel what you actually feel.
No, no. And in fact, for me and a lot of men that I know over the years, and I've seen it equally in women. This is both on both sides of the divide, quote unquote, the false divide. Is that the hardest thing for my male wound-based ego was that to finally be able to admit in my deeper self that this woman in some domains that I'm with now, 17 years this year, knows me better than I know myself.
Yeah.
Oh, that and women who have endured patriarchy and mansplaining for 1,000 years, when I've ever offered, Bree, in this one domain, maybe I know you better than you do. Well, the outrage, there's mansplaining and patriarchy condescending, is triggered
Yeah.
out of an honest, real truth, which makes it hard for Bree then or women to decode that,
Yeah.
and not reactive to the patriarchy if they still got patriarchal projections. So it's really a complex issue,
Yeah.
and
Only
and
protectors, I have the same thing. It's only protectors would have a problem in any given moment that the other person might know something about you that you don't. Because you could demonstrate in 10 seconds that is often the case,
It's often. And I used to consciously be aware of that. I want to be with a woman who, in some ways, knows me better than I do, so I can learn and grow with her, not play victim to her. And when she's coming at it, and sometimes it's hard to reflect that knowing better heartfully and warmly in both genders, but that's the goal, and we bake that goal consciously in Edenity.
Let's go back to the article
Yes.
that we're wading through. I don't know if we're going to get through all three, but this one was the gem. Okay, so yes, definition of trigger, that's where we were. Yes, sensory reminders that cause painful memories or symptoms to resurface. We don't see them as the cause, as said. We're going on here. These can be reminders of a traumatic event. Right there, traumatic event. We would say, no, events aren't traumatic.
No,
the inability to digest the event is what's traumatic, and only for children.
Oh, God, that distinction, I'm just reminded of, is so big, a chasm, you could drive a paradigm through it.
Yep.
And
I find that one fascinating so much, because I was just talking to someone today who's like, I don't know why I do these things. My childhood wasn't that traumatic. And that's the content versus content issue. No, the trauma is in context, is that nobody was feeling you and with you and helping you to digest your emotions. And it doesn't matter whether you got left too long alone at the ice cream store or not. You were alone. So these can be reminders of a traumatic event, parentheses, which is not actually the problem, comma, somebody that hurt you, also content, not the real issue. An anniversary, also not the issue, we would say. The feelings you felt during a difficult time or the breakup of a relationship. In other words, these can be reminders of a list of content things that felt bad.
Yes.
And therefore, that's the problem.
Right.
It goes on to say, they're at best unpleasant and at worst, wait for it, quite traumatizing. Oh, dear. So the reminder of the traumatic event can itself be traumatizing?
I guess they're meaning that it re-traumatizes you. The trigger re-traumatizes you, which I get what they mean, but it's still off. It's still it's not a right diagnosis, a correct diagnosis.
Right, because if you got left at the ice cream store alone for half a day before anyone noticed you were gone, that content event, they're saying that's what traumatized you. Right. And so then thinking about it or being reminded of it, that also is traumatizing to you. Well, which is it? Is it the thinking about it, or is it the actual thing that traumatizes you, or both?
Right. Oh God, it's so tied up in the helix, a double helix of confusion in this way, and that this all illuminates a really let's repeat that Edenity's framework is that it is not what happens to us that causes our lingering wounding. It's the fact that no one helped us digest the trauma of being left at the ice cream store. Let's say Mama walked off from the "I'll be right back, honey," and got caught with someone, a friend at a dress store down the street, for example, and they were chatting, and they hadn't seen each other in 20 years or something. And all of a sudden, the mother went, "Oh shit! My kid's waiting for me," and so runs back to the thing, and here's her daughter, in this case, let's say, crying in the corner, mommy, thinking mommy abandoned her. So when you get home here, that trauma is immediately healable by Mama saying, how did you feel thinking that Mama abandoned you? And if the child can digest it with the perpetrator, quote unquote, or the heartful perpetrator who has interest, not guilt. Maybe they have a little bit of guilt, but it doesn't stop them.
That's a great distinction, because that's what most parents would lead with, and guilt is not an open heart.
No, guilt is not. And people think guilt opens your heart. It doesn't. It's just if you feel good, it allows you to do the same damn thing again in a week or in the next moment. Guilt is the worst motive to drive any sort of relationship.
Well, wait, we got to unpack that. You just skipped a bunch of steps. Guilt allows people to do it again because it off-gasses and makes them feel better about it, but it doesn't address the underlying reason they did the thing in the first place.
Exactly.
You can't assume people get that, Stace. Jeez.
No, I know. Thanks for, you got to stop me that way, because I've been doing this for 40 years.
I know.
So the first thing Mama would say at getting home was, "Oh, I met da 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 da, and that's why I'm so sorry." That's still off base from Edenity's point of view. The first thing is, how did you feel, honey?
Yeah.
What was it that you felt there? And then invite her in deeper into her tears, not assuage the tears and try to make them go away. And if she can digest that in that moment, guess what? There's no trauma to linger in the unconscious to be triggered when she's 30 or 25, when her husband doesn't show up for meeting her at a restaurant some night from work.
See? And because that doesn't happen, we grow up thinking hurt is indigestible, so I have to avoid hurt. Therefore, triggers are bad, not gifts. So I have to minimize them.
Oh, such a savagely horror show you just described with that phraseology. Because take a moment, listeners. What we're saying here is that trauma is not the problem. Our inability to emotively digest the trauma is the problem. And that has phenomenally sea change capacities for the way we parent and the way we react to as victims to life or not. So this is a very nuanced, and Joseph had to stop me for the three things in between what I just passed over. But these things go so fast for me in discourse. So this is why why this is worth unpacking the way Joseph is reading here, because look at all of what illuminates Edenity's version of it, which you can agree with or not agree with.
It's what we're doing here. It's a great exercise just in paradigmatic thinking, where they're stating this is how it is without stating it's according to this paradigm, when we're revealing the paradigm behind it. So the last clause here about triggers, they're quite traumatizing, at worst quite traumatizing in themselves, which we discussed, comma, especially for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, which we have to unpack that as well. Because what PTSD is already based on the a priori assumption that the trigger can't be worked, that the triggers are bad, and
Right.
why it's there can't be healed. So it's packaged up in a disorder that you have to live with for the rest of your life, and you can treat but not heal.
God, that's exactly right. A good example is wartime PTSD, veterans who come back just emotionally destroyed by their experience of savagery in the battlefield. That it's not the savagery in the battlefield that is the trauma. It's their inability to emotively move through and digest that experience, which you can't do unless you have a psychological dharma
Yeah.
that sees that we're emotive beings before we're energetic beings.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just treat it as energy, as most do, as the base, then you're going to think that the event itself of seeing your best buddy blown to 6 different pieces that are still recognizable as him next to you on the battlefield, that's not what causes the ongoing PTSD. The inability to emotively digest that PTSD is the why it still lingers.
I can't remember if I talked about this in one of the podcasts, but I came up with a metaphor in an article I wrote a while back about digestibility that it felt like somebody in me told me about it. So it was very instructive for me that if we don't have perfect parents, which nobody does, then as children, hurt is like trying to swallow a golf ball. It harms us, right?
Yes.
It doesn't just hurt us, it harms us. It's literally indigestible.
Right.
For adulthood, before we do any work on ourselves, hurt is like a really, really super strong hot pepper, like a ghost pepper. It makes you panic. It's very painful. It doesn't do any lasting damage, but it's not harmful.
It's not harm. It's just hurt. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
But it's so strong, it feels like it will harm us. And we sweat and maybe throw up or whatever, but it doesn't do long-lasting harm. But we think it will. After working with our childhood wounds, hurt becomes an ice cube. It might be a little uncomfortable depending on the size, but we can swallow it and it will just disappear once you feel it all the way through. That's a cool metaphor, right?
Oh, it is a great metaphor, sure. The other one, the golf ball is not slippy slidey and isn't meltable, so swallowable. So yeah, you could suffocate if it was a big ice cube physically in the metaphor, but assuming it's not 100% blocks your esophageal canal, you're good. Good metaphor.
Okay. Thank you. So, so here we go. Here's the beginning of the solution. So we have identified the problem and like a good article starts with the pain, and here comes the solution to your problem from courtesy of psychology. People try to support each other through triggers. Interesting. And what does that mean to be supported through a trigger? They don't say what that is. By providing trigger warnings for potentially harmful content. There's that word. Potentially harmful content on social media, in literature, and even on TV in an effort to avoid the person being triggered and dealing with the aftermath of that. Yes. So trigger warnings, because triggers they've established are bad, and there's potentially harmful content, which we would say is impossible for an adult. There's no such thing as harmful content. It could hurt them, but if it does, then that would be a gift for them to unpack, not something that they require a warning of.
Exactly right. Wow.
Yeah. And then finally, trigger warnings are a useful tool for self-care and, wait for it, protection. Because the human heart needs to be protected.
To wit, Edenity says, emotively mature grown-ups don't need protection, only emotively immature, which we all are by default. So if they say that that's a solution path, they're legitimating a stuck loop that is not what we would call healing at all. And that's the thing I've said probably most often in this domain, Joseph, over the 40 years I've been doing this, is that we have an entirely different definition of healing. And so it's not symptomatic allaying symptoms. It's not sparing us from emotive trauma. It's going deeper into emotive trauma, it's not going to kill you, even though it feels like it might.
Yeah.
So,
And if it feels like it might kill you, that's probably how you know it's working.
yes,
That's how you
because
know you're on the
you're
right
letting
track.
yourself feel it
Yeah.
all that way, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
and we protection is in capital letters here for us to look at, but also the end of the sentence, self-care.
Oh
So
God.
yeah, it's trigger warnings are a useful tool for self-care and protection. We would say trigger warnings are a useful new tool for our inauthentic, separated from soul strategic selves to feel good as much as possible and wall themselves off from their trigger ability based in childhood wounds that's causing the difficulty in the first place. And we would say,
I cannot add one one grammatical dot or exclamation point after it. That was magnificent,
thank you. I'm
Joseph.
on a linguistic roll today. It's been released exactly from what I did last night in self-care. My
Yes.
expression of self-care last night was steering myself into one of the most horrific emotional situations I've been in since I can remember.
Yes.
And so we see self-care as milking a trigger for all it's worth and feeling every iota of how painful it is, not
Yes.
requiring
That's
someone to warn us
self-care.
for it. Yeah.
Right. And which is the opposite definition of self-care in that article.
Yeah. It
Make
also,
me feel good. Make me smile.
yeah.
Don't make me cry.
Yeah.
Oh.
And if this is a new idea to you and you think it's crazy, you are very much understanding what we're talking about, because
Yes.
it feels to the protection that it is
Yeah.
crazy. Like, why on earth? I just had a client I was talking with earlier today about this idea of like, when you are hurt by someone, feel the hurt. And they said, well, why would I do that? Like, what is that going to do? And it's like, yeah, you don't get to know. And that's how our protectors think. It's like, why would I feel something if I don't know what it's going to accomplish?
Yes.
And
It wants to keep the entry door shut unless it has a clear exit door from the experience, and that's we can never know. Exactly said.
Yeah, and because this steers us into the chaos of not just relationality, but really reality itself.
Oh yeah, then that allows me to dig a small rabbit hole here,
Please.
Where Edenity has crossover between non-dual sage paradigms of growth and expansion, and personhood, where personhood and sagehood overlap is exactly in this dynamic here, where both in our personhood dharma and in the Buddha's teaching, every moment in life starts in chaos. That's a straight out of the handbook, a sage thing taught by the Buddha, not out of his handbook, he didn't write one. But when he said life was suffering, technically, what he really meant was life starts every moment in chaos.
Yes, the word is dukkha. Life is dukkha, which means impermanence is a better translation than suffering.
Exactly,
it's
right. Impermanence, right, dukkha. So in that sense, that's what if we're being authentically all the way in scorched earth sage, this becomes a de facto acceptance that every moment starts with an unpredictable, uncontrollable dynamic coming at us. And that what the West has done, and now the East in its westernization dynamics, has done, and here's where it links over to personhood, is that all of our control mechanisms, all of our protections, absolutely are dedicated to not living that way.
Yeah.
And so everything that Joseph just said was actuated by allowing the chaos, impermanent, unknowing depth of pain that was possible by letting in this dynamic. Completely correlates, resonates with sage that starts every moment with non-dualistic, uncontrollable impermanence. And so here's where sagehood and personhood co-sign each other and are integratable in just one small way in Edenity, where they are absolutely dissonant. One says the personal self is an illusion. Absolutely, there's no negotiation. And the other one says there is no personal self. Absolute, no negotiation. So in this case, was a good example where chaos or impermanence is the real thing, and all of our protections utilize an artificial control mode to make life.
And it is not the agenda of a typical mainstream therapist to deliver you to the real, unadulterated, raw chaos of life, which they themselves don't live in.
No.
So how could they even tell you about it, much less lead you to it? But that's what EBE is about, and that's a marked difference. I mean, for one, I mean, just that it has a spiritual side at all.
Yeah.
And this is one of the ways in which it's just completely different. And I have to say that mistranslation of dukkha, that's one of the many things that just makes me crazy. Because my father used to say things, my social father, like, life is suffering, you know, going out to shovel the snow or having me shovel the snow. Life is suffering, he would say. That's what the Buddha said. And, you know, even though I was 8 years old, it was always seems like something was very wrong with that. And then, 30 years later, I discovered, oh, that's not what the Buddha taught at all.
No, it's not content. It's the existential context.
Yeah, it's impermanent and unsatisfying, he was saying. That the content is not satisfying. It blows my mind sometimes how the most brilliant teachings of the world get turned into the exact opposite of, not just misinterpreted a little bit, but just a lot.
On the other side of the universe, misinterpreted. Right.
Okay, so here we are.
That orange, I think.
Oh, no, there's more.
Oh, okay.
So we haven't even gotten to the solution to this problem. We've just been deconstructing triggers. Now, it says, social media users and mental health professionals are discussing what they're calling the, quote, opposite of triggers. Now, that's an interesting thing to consider, what the opposite of a trigger is. But there wasn't one. There wasn't one, and there still isn't one. But they're purporting that the opposite of a trigger is a glimmer.
Yes.
And then new headline, the intentional joy of glimmer.
Yes.
The intentional joy of glimmers. So-and-so therapist describes glimmers as, quote, some kind of cue, either internal or external, that brings one back to a sense of joy or safety. Okay, so we got to we got to stop and talk about safety.
Oh, God.
Talk about safety. Why do you...
I get acid reflux every time safety is used in that context.
Same here. And that's really big. I think we've talked about that here and there before. Yep. But correct me if I'm wrong. An adult creates their own safety. And if they don't feel safe, it's a childhood, it's a trigger. And as discussed, that would be something to explore and feel and revel in how unsafe you were as a child, not ameliorate by distracting yourself from the unsafe feeling.
Amen. Go.
And some kind of cue. So in other words, and we also have to say the headline, the intentional joy.
Yes.
Intentional joy. You can't even get 6 words in this article. Joy as a function of intention.
No.
Intention is of the mind. So can the mind create joy? We would say no. Joy is an aspect of soul. If the mind is intentionally creating it, it's not. It's mentally constructed happiness, content-based happiness, whether it's based on something that's actually happening or as what they're saying, and I'll read from this, is concocting, fabricating a experience in your own mind in order to make yourself feel better.
Using will to create a mind visualization of something that makes you feel joyful as a glimmer of joy to offset the trauma trigger that has not been adequately digested. Yeah. Let's just cover it over. It's like covering a floor of holes with an oriental rug. When did this not become clear? When did we lose sight that you don't offset your way to healing? You can't oppositify. You can't allopathicize your way to healing. You have to homeopathize.
Well, I love that you use the word offset, because a synonym for that is compensate. And that's exactly what this is. And there's the marked difference between EBE and psychology. Psychology seeks to help you compensate better, which is what a glimmer is, rather than actually heal, which would be fine, except that they don't say, no, we're not interested in healing. We gave up on that a long time ago. What we're interested in doing is helping you compensate for that which we've decided we can't heal. If they said that, I would be way more honest, because that's what's actually going on.
Well, I'd respect that. And then they always use these cutesy poo little nomenclature, a glimmer. Well, now we're going to employ glimmers. Oh my God, that's so 2000s, where this whole thing started out in the discourse in social media of these little catchwords and their utilization to entertain ourselves instead of grow ourselves.
Yes. This author, she adds, quote, in our overstimulated worlds, which apparently people are victims of, the overstimulation. They cannot stop the stimulation. In our overstimulated worlds, glimmers can be the answer. That's like kind of asserting that this is a healing thing. Glimmers can be the answer to, wait for it, I get literally nauseated saying this phrase, regulating our overwhelmed nervous systems. Ugh. I hate the regulation of nervous systems thing. It's so probably that's reduction of the emotional body and the very soul to the mind. It's just your nervous system.
Yes. Oy. The mind and its associated brain stem reactivity.
Yeah. So as if on cue, here's where the article goes next. New headline. So where did this come from? Well, new paragraph. Right back in 1995, which is crappy writing, right back in 1995, behavioral neuroscientist, big surprise, a behavioral neuroscientist came up with this. Jeez, I thought it would have been a spiritual leader.
I'm shocked, Joseph.
A behavioral neuroscientist, Stephen Porges, introduced polyvagal theory, which describes how our autonomic nervous system, parentheses, which controls involuntary actions like breathing, I see. So emotions are like involuntary actions like breathing, okay, is searching for and reading cues to find out if they're dangerous. So yes, so our emotions and our triggers are part of our autonomic nervous system seeking safety. This is, you'd have to be a behavioral neuroscientist to see triggers this way.
Absolutely. And I want to insert here, because it went so fast, that Joseph used an extremely important philosophical term called reductionism. I did?
Yes. I didn't even remember saying that.
Yeah, you did. It was reductionistic, I think you said, used it. But it's where the one domain is reduced in a smaller way to a more senior domain is relegated to a metaphor or a reduction to a lesser essential domain, a reductionism of our soulful source of emotivity down, which is only mediated by the body and its vagal and autonomic system, not caused by it.
Right.
And that's where we diverge in identity here. But this is paradigmatically resonant with neuro.
It's completely consistent with that paradigm. And it goes on to say, by seeking glimmers, people are undertaking a process called neuroception. Made up word, but that's fine. Neuroception. So that's like perceiving things with your neurons intentionally. A neuroception, and the vagus nerve, which regulates organ functions, is responsible for the warm feelings we get from it. No, that's not what's responsible for it. That's the mind is creating a picture that it wants to believe, and then we're having an emotional reaction to a mental body picture. Yes. They can't. How do they prove this? And then it secondarily shows up in the nervous system.
Yeah, in our world,
in our picture.
But and so this is why one of the reasons in personhood, how identity was constructed in the first place was I just kept saying no to what I heard or read like this, and then sunk into it further and tried to find the principle that was behind the opinion. And then I said no to the principle. Then I would drop into the context of where it came from, and then realize that was wound-based. And so that was the deconstruction, not reductionism, of how identities no finally yielded a yes.
Oh, I never realized this. You literally deconstructed your way to, quote,
Yes,
building the paradigm. You didn't actually build it. You arrived at it by taking things apart. Oh, that makes
absolutely.
perfect sense.
Otherwise, I would have channeled it from spirit. No,
Right.
this was
Yeah.
this was bottom up. This paradigm came from bottom up. Not it's the first spiritual paradigm that's come from bottom up, not top down.
Oh, I didn't
Uh,
realize that.
yeah, I deconstructed. I felt a revulsion, judgment, repulsion, whatever. That was not okay with me until I got to the principle, and then I had to see what paradigm the principle came out of, and then I had to see what whether how real to real life that paradigm actually resonated or dissonated, and that was then the final of any domain or moment I had a reaction. That's how the identity slowly got educed out of no's. And then what was left at the bottom? Oh, I guess that's the yes. I better make a principle out of that yes, and then start testing it to see if
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
not
Then you started
crazy. Then you got to
experimenting with
test
it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you got to test it. So
That's
no,
so
that's the way
wild.
identity was built.
Wow. Yeah. I don't think I knew that, or I certainly didn't appreciate it. I figured some of it just came to you.
No, it
Wow.
was.
That's so cool.
I certainly had inspired help in that process of deconstruction and subtraction. But no, I had an innate yes that I can say I had at the bottom, but that innate yes was what way upstream previously downstream made me say no. I couldn't say no to those unless I had an innate yes somewhere that collided with it. So I
Hmm.
had to discover my own yes. I didn't have it automatically by that deconstructive sequence.
Hmm. Wow. So yeah, a couple more things worth reading. Maybe that's the meat of it. Uh, and then new headline: How to find our glimmers. Find, create. How to find our glimmers. As with all wellness trends, we could go down a rabbit hole about wellness trends. That's for sure. Glimmers have taken off on TikTok, and creators on the app on TikTok have spoken about their experiences with this sensation. It certainly is a sensation. Oh, this you're gonna love this. The aptly named creator, quote, the incurable optimist. That's the name of the creator of Glimmers. Says that a glimmer is a, quote, little moment of awe that once you start looking for them and embracing them, life feels, quote, so much sweeter. What a great example of like trying to source awe, which is meaningfulness, right? That's related to meaningfulness. Trying to
Sure.
source meaningfulness and awe in content you create artificially in your own mind that's not actually happening right now.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, there's so many versions of this
Yeah.
across the board in our world, but this is so paradigmatically, nauseatingly clear, you know. And we need to say at this point, Joseph, with all of our agape reactions and our oh my gods, this is all younger souls can do,
Yeah.
and that utilizing glimmers this way is the best solution for younger souls. We're only saying in Identity, because Identity, we would say this over and over again, the world has already offered good services for the young in the middle and the teenage versions of how many incarnations we've had. It has not served up medicine, good interventions for elder souls, older souls. Identity is simply that. It wants to join the conversation on the earth, not to say these are all wrong. They're just not appropriate for the deeper healing parameters that older souls need. Have been here more than 350 times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that these are the only thing younger souls can come up with. But if you dare to reflect that possibility, what if this is just your young soul? And thank you for creating that false oasis in the middle of a snowstorm that's you're getting frostbite in. You visualize a glimmer oasis in your head. And that, because if you think about a sexy kind of interlude with a person you're attracted to, if you're a man, you can get erect. The mind.
That's a glimmer.
That's a glimmer right there, right? A glimmer to aid in masturbation, if that's what your trip is or your jam is.
Yeah, no, that's a whole other rabbit hole. Like, so if I were to
Yeah.
say I'm with a therapist who is teaching me about glimmers and inviting me to try it, and I say, okay, well, I find you kind of attractive, so can I use as a glimmer imagining having sex with you? Would that be a glimmer if that works for me?
Yes.
What would they say then? Like,
Well,
no, is there a healthy glimmer and an unhealthy glimmer?
Well, I think if I can reduce myself to being a younger soul, because I can remember sort of what that felt like, I would say as the therapist, well, if it absolves you of the sticky aspects of a trigger, have at it.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then there again would be an abusive use of the authority to support that for what it seems like the right reason, but is completely inappropriate.
I think I said this before on the podcast, but it's a experience I will never forget when I had a run-in with some really bad bureaucracy in the healthcare system. And I was so frustrated and so just trapped feeling, and that was a trigger for me for sure. It brought up the trapped, bureaucracy. See Franz Kafka, and I would not want to meet his mother. Who probably made him feel really trapped and alone. And the bureaucracy is still a tough trigger for me because of my childhood. But I remember I actually fantasized for like 5 or 10 seconds about taking a gun into this healthcare clinic and shooting up the place. And I felt better for a second until I was like, well, obviously I'm not going to do that. But was that a glimmer? So can fantasizing
glimmers be clearing mechanisms?
Yeah. Can what about if I want to fantasize shooting up a school? And that makes me feel awe and release and takes me off of the childhood wound. Is that an effective glimmer? I mean, we could just sit here and brainstorm these crazy things, or exterminate an entire race of people. What about that? What if that makes me feel good?
Yeah.
Just thinking about it.
Yeah, Hitler could have read this article and said, "Oh, here's my glimmer. I visualize and make real genocidal things because that makes me feel good."
Yeah, well, I don't think he killed any Jews. He just talked about how it should be done. He was just thinking about it, just talking about it. That's like a glimmer. And then other people did it.
Oh, I can't laugh. I'm laughing. I shouldn't. This is beyond the Ken. Beyond the Ken. Did we just?
We got to get to Kenergy.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm going into an absurdity frenzy.
Yeah, I think we've squeezed all the juice out of this lemon we can.
Okay.
But again, out there in social media land, if you're addicted to, if your human life has a big factor of social media in it, you're a young soul. That's just the way it is. And that's okay. Be where you are. Utilize these things. However, if you happen to be listening, if you're a social media addict, and you happen to be listening to these podcasts, one day, one life, you'll have to unplug all these pseudo-protective offsets to what you call happiness or well-being, because most of what they call wellness out there is really willness. It's the will. Well-being, really well-being is served, not healthily heart-based, soul-based healing. Mm-hmm. So you'll have to unplug it someday. I'm not saying it's this lifetime is the way, but just here's our offsets to the offset principle. The allopathic principle. Glimmer is just another allopathy. It's clever, and maybe it'll help people stay off antidepressants. If that's help, it's a lesser of two evils.
It's clever, but it's so not new. I mean, it's as old as behavioral psychology, which is like 100 years, practically 80 to 100
absolutely.
years. It's just been repackaged and renamed, like most of the wellness industry. I'm going to keep that one.
The wellness industry.
So now on to, speaking of packaging, there's a new word in our vernacular, and that is, as said, Kenergy. I'm looking here at a picture of Ryan Gosling in clipped from a scene in the new Barbie movie. Why they made a Barbie movie, I don't know. I guess to appeal to my generation who grew up with it.
Brie.
Oh yeah, Barbie's older
generation. 59, I think. Barbie. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
She has Barbie has legs, so to speak. It's been around a long time. So the word Kenergy has made its way into pop culture. The word describes confidence, energy, and the self-belief that Barbie's boyfriend Ken seems to embody in the film. I may never see the film, so I don't know if I'll know, but I might have to watch it just to get the taste of the Kenergy zeitgeist. Health experts say there are many ways you can find your Kenergy, from attending checkups with your doctor and getting better quality sleep to eating a healthier diet and practicing self-belief. Now, self-belief, I think, is what, yeah.
Well, unpack that one.
First of all, health experts are talking about Kenergy. Let's just start there. Like, why are they doing that? Did they not have enough words in their medical vocabulary that they needed to glom onto a pop film culture thing? Yes. So Kenergy, again, confidence, energy, and self-belief. These are the three pillars, if you will, of Kenergy. I can't say Kenergy many more times. I'm losing my mind. The three pillars, the metaphysics of Kenergy are confidence, energy, and self-belief. And you can
believing in the self-belief.
Yes, and the experts are telling us that this can be achieved through regular checkups, better quality sleep, diet, which is like that helps everything. But most importantly, it seems practicing self-belief. That's because that's a relatively more specific idea. And Gosling coined the phrase, Ryan Gosling, the actor who plays him, he says it's basically a person who looks after themselves mentally and physically, doesn't take themselves too seriously, and isn't afraid to partake in conventionally feminine things. In other words, it's a model of positive masculinity that prioritizes mental, physical, and social health. I mean, this is just so vague. I don't even know how to talk about it. It's just like...
Well, I love being reduced to the sentiments of a doll. I love that, right? As a masculine based being with all the right equipment. So
let's start with
for a man anyway.
Yeah, the metaphysical frame begins with sort of the cosmology of the Barbie paradigm.
Yeah,
that the man is derivative of the woman because Barbie is the star of the show. And so that's why it's important that he goes along. It says that somewhere in here. He just goes along with what she wants to do. Right here it says, isn't afraid to let Barbie take the lead.
Yes.
So that's our paradigm here, is you're a secondary person to the Barbie, to the woman.
I read something this morning where one article said that actually the character of Barbie in this film is queer. She actually is not interested in Ken, only as a sidekick and a buddy. That was a little
because he has no genitals. The doll has no genitals. That would make sense.
Everything else, yeah. But so what I'm hearing you would immediately hear. I didn't read that part of the Kenergy thing that you brought up here, but it's exactly what happened in feminism. That women were, it's when it spilled over to personal relationality is where feminism lost their beat. It was completely reasonable, social, business, power in the culture, all that. But as soon as it got started osmosing to personal relationships with men, women then borrowed the worst of the patriarchy and wanted men to be denuded of their masculinity so they could finally be in charge. And that's understandable as a reflex to being put in the kitchen and being the underling for, 10,000 years, understandable, but it's still tragic. So Ken is embodying the passive we spacer man to the me spacer yang driven Barbie in that way, just like what happened in feminism.
Well, and here's the answer to a post-feministic frame of masculinity. This is under the heading 2, believe in yourself. If you've watched the Barbie movie, which I haven't and I may have to, you'll know that Ken is a character that doesn't take himself too seriously. Repeated phrase in this article. It's important not to take yourself too seriously. What that actually means and why, we don't know, but it's important. Continuing, something, don't take yourself too seriously, something which requires confidence and self-belief. So you have to be confident and believe in yourself to not take yourself too seriously. All right. I get what that's saying, but very weak metaphysics here. He's also happy to sit back and let Barbie take the lead. So, given all of this, which we're just supposed to accept, at the face value, the article says, how can you make like Ken and develop a strong sense of self-belief? First things first, pay attention to your thoughts. Quote, if you find yourself using more words that put you down than encourage you, heads up, that needs to be adjusted. I'm not encouraging you to be arrogant. I'm encouraging you to not be a jerk to yourself, she says. So, you know what?
That's the voice of self-judgment. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. Don't try to find the source of that. Just ignore it or offset it, right?
Yes. If you, quote, if you don't want to sabotage yourself, at least cut out all that, quote, stupid, useless failure language. It isn't serving you. So here we see a cousin to the glimmer, rather than using the mind and the will to create an experience that isn't actually happening in the mind. It's using it to set aside negative self-talk that isn't serving you. But wait a minute. Who's deciding that it's not serving you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How do you know it's not serving you? How do we know that? What is the point of negative self-talk?
Right. Edenity would say this is an important, critical aspect of healing, to be able to hear the voice of your self-criticism and heal the wound at the bottom of it, not offset it with another oasis mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Another more allopathy.
Yeah.
So again, that's the best younger souls can do, but it gets caught in our craw when it's sold as the answer for everyone. Mm-hmm. But this is what religion has done for 10,000 years, 5,000 years anyway, directly.
Right.
One size fits all. One size fits all. Same thing with modern or even ancient and modern sagehood. One size fits all. Everyone's ego is an illusion. No, sorry, that's an absolute truth. So yeah, wow, a cousin. I love how these overlap.
Well, but it's all based in the idea that we're mental beings first. So all these things then make sense.
Well, I want to do a helpful offset, a little burp in our track here about the Barbie movie, because my first reaction to it was, well, I've got to see it to check if my repulsion of the whole idea is reasonable, like my whole repulsion the last 5 years to the Marvel Universe cartoon, comic book consciousness quotient that overtook the movie industry. Mm-hmm. It's juvenile, it's Comic-Con in motion in the movies. Well, now we have a doll. It's just an offset, sort of a version of Comic-Con, because it's a doll for children, right? And then Bree and I were talking about, she read an article that, now I've got to see this. I want to see it now, and let me tell you why. Because the hidden agenda of in this for what's her name? I always miss her. Mix
Margot Robbie.
No, the that's the star, the director.
I don't know.
Anyway, what the whole premise of the movie is, Barbie wants to break out of Barbieville and get to real life.
Oh, cool.
That is we would say, from Edenity's point of view, we resonate with the healthiness of that. Mm-hmm. She wants to get out of the strictured trapness of two-dimensionality and wants to break out into the real world to find out what the real world is. That's the reason I want to see it. But all the things that are called positive in this movie are actually things the director wants to break out of.
Break out of the glimmer world.
Exactly. And I don't know how that affects Kenergy if Ryan Gosling is spouting. I mean, he's a great actor. Yeah. I like him. But if people who make their livings by playing other people are not really usually deeply philosophically metaphysical. And so you got to give them a lot of patience. But I don't know what he's saying there, or if he's supporting this whole Kenergy thing. But I think in the deeper way, the director is trying to break out of this stuff, and yet the media, to help sell the movie, is inflating all the superficiality. When I think I don't know for sure, but I want to see it to see what the director's philosophy is, because we've talked about films a lot that way.
Yeah, it's sort of like watching The Matrix and being like, oh man, I wish I could be Cypher and get to have that, eat the steak all the time and smoke the cigar and live the rich life. It's like, I think you missed the point of the film.
Exactly. That's the whole point. So if you focus on what appears to be the assets, the superficial assets of this movie, and are repelled by them, maybe there's a deeper message. And I will see this, and I will report back cool. After seeing this at some point to see the Barbie movie, because that intrigues me. If that's what the director wanted to do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll watch it too. I wouldn't say I'm above that kind of stuff. And while I completely agree about the overdoneness of comic book movies, I do mostly really like them. But I like them for the same reason you dislike them. And that is because they're superficial, basic, and I don't have to worry about people's motives or codependent relationships. It's just entertainment, not
Absolutely.
trying to be anything else.
Sure. I know exactly what you mean. All I can see in superhero movies is compensation for insecurity and unworth showing up as superpowers,
but I'll tell you what, though, there's I might have mentioned this in a podcast before, but at the end of the Avengers, the first one, there's a movie that there's a scene that brings tears to my eyes almost every time, where it's the big epic battle at the end of the film, and what's his name? I forget the actor. Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk. Yeah. He shows up on this puny little scooter that is supposed to be ironically pathetic, and he's like driving around rubble, and the city's already half destroyed. And I forget who he meets up with, another one of the superheroes. Maybe it's Scarlett Johansson's character. I can't remember. And he starts. It's very anticlimactic, and he's like, yeah, I'm here. And he starts walking toward the battle, and she says, well, aren't you going to get angry? And he goes, that's the trick. I'm always angry. Yeah. And starts walking, and it just brings tears to my eyes every time, because yes, you could say there's something about control and mastery of the anger there, but you could also interpret it as an inclusion of all of himself, and that's where his power is coming from.
Sure.
So there are little moments like that in the Marvel movies, especially. The DC one's not as good. But.
I graduated from Superman to Spider-Man precisely because Spider-Man was the first one to self-doubt. It was part of the whole shtick. And then it became a meme in itself that became almost comicalized, ironically, and sardonically. I'm Superman, but I'm scared of mice. It became a self-reveal instead of a really Stan Lee. He brought vulnerability to Spider-Man, and so
Spider-Man was my first favorite superhero. I literally thought I might be Spider-Man when I was like 5 years old, and I literally pulled my father aside and told him I was Spider-Man. And
really?
Yeah, wow. That's how identified I was with Spider-Man, because of the self-doubt and the over-responsibility.
Yes. Oh, good call. That's right. He thinks he has to save everyone and help everyone.
Because he always hurts the people he cares about the most, which is deep in my soul wounding. And so I've always loved Spider-Man. And so,
Yeah, and the intractable conflict when a superhero doesn't want to have a soulmate because that would endanger their life because they have so many enemies. That one really used to give me dissonant vibes that I couldn't solve, because there was good truth in that, but there was also a resignation of inability to change that just dissonated with my soul. So anyway, look, folks, you're used to listening to what is this our 68th or 60?
I don't even have the file open. 60 something, 65.
We're talking about comic books, Barbie movies. You literally cannot say that this is an ivory tower paradigm. because we live in the mud and can talk about identity as view on all sorts of quote unquote non-philosophical shallow topics, which only look non-philosophical, because as Joseph and I have been talking, there is philosophy in everything.
Yep.
In everything. It's impossible not to have psychological depth from motive in the way we present our stories, the stories we tell each other, the stories we write for ourselves. It's all philosophical, even superhero movies, even doll movies. Did you know that there's a worldwide shortage of pink paint because so much of it was used in the Barbie sets? There is a worldwide shortage of it, and now with people are clamoring for it because they want to paint lots of things in their homes the Barbie pink now.
Sure.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, that's that's maybe one route to Kenergy. I mean, if you got Kenergy, you wear pink. You know, that's someone comfortable with their masculinity.
Well, I've got my Italian heritage with my skin color, especially in the summer. Maybe I need a pink tattoo with a circle around a K on my bicep. What do you think?
Symbol of Kenergy.
Yeah, Kenergy, a pink tattoo.
No, that would look like the Circle K logo.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's about that level of discourse. Okay, but not for young souls. So if Kenergy inspires you, go for it until it stops inspiring you. That's what we would always say, right?
Yeah, for sure. But we've been going for a while here. Was there something you wanted to share before we go? Now is probably a good time.
I think I'd have to change gears so deeply.
Okay.
My consciousness quotient would have an aneurysm. I can't go from that to a self-reveal, but I would like to. It's still brewing, so I can carry it over to the next one.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we went lots of different places today, but I think it's it's just phenomenal to me how it's like we're so many decades past NLP and cognitive behavioral therapy, and that we're still seeing in daily news cycles new repackaging of really very old mind-based, will-based stuff.
Exactly.
It's sad. It's really sad that the lack of paradigmatic awareness that sees the glimmer thing as anything new besides the name. It's so not new. And but if we see it as new, which is extreme subjectivism, it's not new objectively, but if we see it as new, well, then maybe it will work in a way that it never has before, because that would be the same mechanism of mind that does the glimmering.
Sure.
Let's just see it as new. Let's just relate to it with, what was that line, the guy, the eternal optimist or whatever?
Yes, the incurable optimist.
Incurable, yes. If we're an incurable optimism, so wait, it's a disease? Well, you're right about that. Optimism is a disease, but it's not curable? I'm not sure. Are you an Enneagram 7? It might be incurable then. I don't know.
Behold the Joseph deconstruction of paradigmatic wordsmithing. Yes.
There's so much paradigmatic richness in the word choice that people use. I can't help it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. I love how your mind works that way.
Oh, I forgot. Speaking of which, I've been last thing I promised. Stanhope, the comedian Stanhope. I forget his first name. I heard this bit he did recently, that's somewhat related to that, where he's making fun of AA because he grew up like being a kid doing homework in the back of the AA rooms, which, you know, is a whole rabbit hole in of itself. Like, I don't think that's okay, right?
But no,
that's not okay to bring your kid and have them, you know, coloring in the back of the AA room while people are talking about stuff. So he had some bones to pick with AA, and he was talking about how it says if you don't have a God, then just create one for yourself. That's the chapter on for agnostics and atheists. And he's talking about the first two steps. And let me see if I can reconstruct this. The first step is to realize that you are powerless before alcohol. You have a disease, and it's more powerful than you are. You were powerless before that, and then you're supposed to surrender to a higher power. And his argument was like, "Well, I'm going to choose alcohol as my god then, because it's more powerful than I am."
Oh, lovely! Oh, that's so good.
I can't believe I never thought of that. It's absolutely brilliant. If you're powerless over alcohol and you don't yet have a god, logically, then alcohol should be your god.
Oh, that's perfect.
Right?
And it resonates with my famous line that people have laughed at and cried over for years, and that is, AA moves us from an addiction to alcohol to an addiction to alcoholism.
Right. Yes, that's right.
And that fits sort of, or resonates with Stan's great...
Well, yeah, in a way they do. They have alcohol up on an altar saying, I'm not worthy, I can't drink you, and you have all the power.
Yes, exactly. So you literally, they shift it, which is an improvement in symptoms, but it covers when you're addicted now to alcoholism and the self-talk and the projections that you have to do to get off the sauce, so to speak. Yeah. It's better than being on it, but you know what the recidivism rate is in AA?
30%?
By their own?
No, higher, 70, 80? More?
90.
Oh, God.
90% recidivism in the long term for AA. And so when I asked once an AA counselor about that, he said, well, if we weren't trying, those 10% would never be reached. And I said, amen.
Yeah.
Have at it, bud.
Yeah, but where's the meta of like, and maybe we need to be looking at an entirely new way at the same time to get more percentage points. Yeah.
That's you can double check that for me, but I have seen that number. I was astonished by it too, because I would have said 40 to 50, but I think if you can check really quick here, because I don't want to leave people thinking that I'm misquoted here.
I say Google says 35% absence rate for 2 to 3 years if they go to meetings. Estimates say that 40 to 60% of people relapse from sobriety within a year of treatment. So long term, it would have to be more than 40 to 60%.
Yeah. Okay. So that supports what this was raw, not time based. Anyone who spent enough time in AA to qualify, in the long term, only 10% of them stay off alcohol.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah. I know the most, like the live-in treatment centers, I know at most they'll boast like 20 or 30% as a recidivism rate. They work better as well. And they're doing like residence level therapy in groups. And it's
not those meetings at the Moose Lodge.
And they're free and they're everywhere, so that's great. They definitely help people, but without that secondary question of like, why doesn't it work? Which can't be questions, because if addiction is a disease, then what are you going to do?
Well, we have to close with Edenity's picture of all addictions come out of unconscious, unhealed woundings.
Right.
We're reaching for a drug of any kind to not feel something. I always say that people who are rabid pet owners, all pets are emotional support animals. Yeah. For all pet owners, except those who have casual cats, you can't really make an addiction out of.
You need a lot of them to do that. You need a lot
of 10 or 20 of them to qualify. But even one dog can be, of course, something that
they're far more relational.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they hook so many people. Mm-hmm. Anyway, okay, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Stace. Thank you, listeners. That was a journey.
It was, and it had lots of bright spots and a lot of agape moments. And in the end, stick with whatever you're doing until it doesn't work for you anymore.
Amen. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.